Why do people like to go to see live music in general?
People like live music. It's an experience. Have you ever gone to a show? I've been to shows where you walk in and you experience what you're experiencing with 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 people, 30,000 people. And you get to a point where you're like, this isn't just a show anymore. This is religion.
Yep.
There's something that happens when you're surrounded by this. And you got to understand, when you see somebody and when you're attracted to somebody's music and you become into it, you listen to it, you read about it, and now you're watching the guy that you've only seen in magazines. Yep. They live miles and galaxies away
yep.
from you. So, and here they are, they're right there. And you get to watch them do their thing. And sometimes they're great. Sometimes they don't need to do much and you're blown away. And sometimes they are a force to be reckoned with on stage. There's something that happens. There are certain performers out there that when they hit that stage, something happens that you're not going to see for the rest of your life. And I think that's why people like live music. The
big thrill for me when I first started going to see live music was exactly what you just said. My first show was seeing Metallica, right. 1989. And it was just amazing just to see, there he is. There's James Hetfield right there.
Right.
And I remember to go see bands. There's the Ramones. There's Johnny Ramone. He's right there,
He's standing
there. And having the music engulfing you, being played louder than any stereo system that you could have, is great. And just those two things alone, to go see a live band, is enough to go see a show. But there's another element that could be added to it to take things to an even more of a level than just listening to the music on your stereo. And that's, well, I guess the best way to call it is shock rock.
Well, shock rock, like I mentioned earlier, you have a band, you love a band, and now you're sitting in a venue and you're watching a band that you love, and it's great. When you get into shock rock, this takes it to a whole different level. There's theatrics involved sometimes,
yep.
But I think the perfect shock rock is not something that just resonates in the venue that you're watching a shock rocker perform. This is somebody who's affected the world. This is somebody that has protesters out in front of the venue before you walk in, saying, don't listen to this music. This is the Satan's music. When you've pissed off the fundamentalists and you got the Bible Belt out there with their little bullhorns, that's a shock rocker. I mean, there's thousands of bands that have props and have, theatrics and makeup and costumes.
You just described Kiss. So okay.
There's 100 bands that have that.
Hold on,
but I think when you get blamed for the Vietnam War like Alice Cooper did, you have done a shocking thing, and it is rock and roll.
He got blamed for the Vietnam War.
He claims that all the time. He's like, everybody wants a martyr, and they'll blame anybody for any. I got blamed for the Vietnam War. He did. That's the insanity of people that protest this, is because they always say it's you fear what you don't understand.
Yeah.
And rock and roll at its genesis is shocking.
Yep.
Early 50s. Rock and roll hits the scene. I mean, before that, you got Rosemary Clooney and Perry Como. Let's have another cup of coffee and let's have another piece of pie. And then you got frickin', Chuck Berry singing about his ding-a-ling.
Yeah.
You got Bill Haley in the comics rocking around the clock.
That's shocking in its own way.
I mean, you got Elvis shaking his hips. I mean, no, people didn't know what the hell. It messes up their paradigm. They start short-circuiting. It's like
the fembots in Aston.
Because that's what's they just go that's what rock and roll does, and that's what's great about rock and roll. Because good rock and roll, whether it's shocking or glamorous, it's always something that pisses off your parents and pisses off the religious folk. The fundamentalists.
This scares people.
It scares people.
Or even yourself.
When you have scared a community of people to the point where they are out boycotting your show, which, by the way, you're not hurting that band. By the time you're out there doing that, you're doing nothing but helping the band. And I think maybe they've caught on to that. But a band that has people that are protesting and saying, don't go see this show, what are kids going to do?
They're going to go see the show.
They're just like, when they say this is the worst band in the world, what do kids want to do? I want to go see the worst band in the world. This is the most terrible thing that ever happened.
So
I want to see the most terrible thing that ever happened, don't you?
Yeah, well, that's like every band that I've ever played with in my musical career. So I guess the first shock rocker would be Screaming Jay Hawkins.
Screaming Jay Hawkins.
I put a spell on you.
I put a spell on you. He would come on the stage in a coffin. And
no, he'd come on stage coughing.
His coffin's cough.
That's a
I
dad.
put a spell on you.
That's a dad joke. But he'd come out in a coffin. I think the coffin
one time,
and he'd come out of it.
Yeah.
And then you have like some kind of like a bone.
Yeah,
in his
like
nose.
a voodoo bone in his nose or whatever. But yeah, Screaming Jay Hawkins. I want to say, like the seeds for shock rock were planted with Screaming Jay Hawkins. I Put a Spell on You.
Yep.
And Arthur Brown.
Let's talk about
I am the god of hellfire.
I remember that guy scared the fuck out of me. I remember
I watch videos of him now, and it's disturbing. He
now.
came out with a helmet
but that was on
that
fire.
was on fire. And like this is the late '60s when everybody's doing this.
MTV used to have, it was called the MTV Closet Classics.
Right.
It was a show, and they would play like old videos from the '60s. That's where I saw like Paranoid from Black Sabbath.
Right.
I remember seeing Blue Cheer.
Yeah.
Summertime.
Good stuff.
And I remember, and then I'll never forget, I saw the video for Crazy World of Arthur Brown, Fire, right?
Yeah.
And he, in the beginning of this video, is him going like, I am the god of hellfire, and I bring you. And then he goes into
And that's
song.
still scary.
And-
if you
and-
played that if you just played that sample full blast anywhere on the street and somebody wasn't expecting it, it'll make you jump.
Oh, fuck it. And he's like, and he's wearing some kind of weird metal
He's got
mask.
a metal mask, but he's got a bowl of fire.
Yeah, it's like this high.
And it's fire.
And even creepier is
This is like pre-Michael Jackson Pepsi commercial fire.
And like his band, like all the guys in the band are wearing those like clear masks that are creepy.
And those are creepy. Those still are paying off. The clear mask that distorts your face.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's shocking. I mean, this is where they are taking it to that level. Up until, this is what, like 67, 68? And I want to say that's Screaming Jay Hawkins as well. It was all around that time that those people were doing that. So they were, like I said, these were like planting the seeds. I mean, you always get somebody who kind of starts doing that.
Yep.
But it's in this like small niche and it never really takes off.
Who was the guy who did Jack the Ripper? Is it Screaming Lord Sutch?
Yeah, Screaming Lord Sutch. And they're from like I want to say they were from British.
They're like
Britain.
they're from like England.
They were from British. They were, yeah.
And it was like from the 60s. And the thing is,
Screaming Lord Hutch. They were another shock.
So there was like a video where like, it's like, so he's dressed up. Yeah. He has like the fucking, the Jack the Ripper hat on. So the band's up, they're already up on stage like, Jack the Ripper, and he has a microphone, and he comes in through the crowd.
Uh-huh.
And he's like literally like going like right up to like chicks, like right up to their face, and they're
yeah.
Well, and like I'd be terrified too if that guy was.
Well, some of the other, we were talking about earlier seeds of shock rock, The Doors, Jim Morrison, and again he wasn't out to be shocking, but he took cues from Julian Beck, who ran Living Theater.
Really?
And then, Julian Beck, Poltergeist 2.
No, I don't know.
You can't keep her, I am not dead. That guy was scarier than hell.
Yes.
He was... Hi, are you lost, sweetheart? Okay, well, that guy ran... Are you afraid, honey?
Is he the guy who's like, you're gonna die, all of you? You are gonna die.
And that look he makes when he's, get the hell out of here. He's like... But the thing is he was dying during the making of that movie. I'm sorry, I'm going off track here. Julian Beck ran Living Theater, and these people would come into the audience, and they would interact with the audience, but they would freak them out. It'd be like, somebody who was on smack saying, I need more heroin, and they would do this kind of like, weird theater improvisation, and Jim Morrison was really influenced by that, and he wanted to put that into his show, where he got there and he got involved with the audience and stuff like that. So living theater, Julian Beck, look it up. That could even be attributed to the shock rock.
What I find fascinating about the history of rock and roll is by the time you get to Arthur Brown, we're talking about the late 60s.
Late 60s.
And rock and roll was only around for a little over a decade at that point.
Yeah.
And already what I find amazing about the birth of rock and roll going in and how quickly it did progress.
Oh God.
And have different things. Because you have to think exactly. There's probably someone like Alice Cooper where it's like, okay, it's one thing to let's get up on stage and just play well and put on a good show and entertain and play.
Right.
But then you have to but then there's the next point where hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did this or this comes out?
It usually takes somebody that's turned on and influenced by that to take that, and then they mold it into their own thing, and boom. That's when you get.
And I think probably with Screaming Jay Hawkins, Arthur Brown. They probably, they dressed up how they did.
Right.
And maybe, but I don't think they really, at that point, they weren't doing, you get to Alice Cooper, he's putting on a show, right. And it's now this is going to happen, and then that's going to happen, and here comes the guillotine, and all
this. But the thing with Alice Cooper, he started off really early in a band called the Spiders, and it took years and years for that man to get to the guillotine part, because they were just experimenting, and you got to understand, Alice Cooper, Vincent Furnier, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. He was in a band called the Spiders in Arizona, and they moved to Hollywood, and they were doing experimental stuff. I mean, Shep Gordon saw them clear out a room. I mean, this is late 60s Hollywood.
Yeah,
everybody's. I think Alice Cooper says it best. He's like, we weren't taking the right drugs. And I know what that means because location is everything when you're doing rock and roll. You got to be at the right place at the right time. And they weren't. They were in Hollywood. Everybody was like peace, love, and understanding. And they were up there just in the beginning stages of putting a show together that would later become the Alice Cooper Show. So they were up there doing their thing, and they were just clearing out a room. Nobody got it. Shep Gordon got it and said, you know what? I got this producer, Frank Zappa. You guys would be perfect. And then they get a hold of Frank Zappa to record their first couple of albums. And there's a funny story about, Frank Zappa said, okay, I'll be here at 7. And they showed up at 7 in the morning and started playing in his living room. And he thought he meant 7 at night.
Oh, shit.
But, as the story goes, he recorded a few albums, some of their first albums, they were called the Nas, Spiders, whatever, before they came up with the name Alice Cooper. And it didn't take off in Hollywood. They had to leave.
What?
It didn't take off.
You serious?
It didn't. No, absolutely not. It was a failure. They moved to Detroit, and that's when they were with their people. That's where people got it, and that's when the monster of Alice Cooper began and the shock rock thing. And there's always something that there's a tipping point with these bands that catapult. Theirs was a show in Toronto, and it was just complete pandemonium on stage.
Oh, I know where this is going.
They were ripping open up a feather pillow, and they're just up there doing their thing, and a chicken wandered on stage. And they threw a chicken out in the crowd, and this thing got torn up to pieces. So Alice Cooper is in the headlines, kills a chicken in front of 50,000 hippies. There is no better PR than that. Everybody thinks, oh, your career's over. No. That just lit the fuse, man. And then you become frickin' Alice Cooper. And then now you've got the bankroll to bring guillotines and electric chairs and shit. And that's how shock rock starts. It's not just the theatrical element. You got to understand, these people, they don't start out I want to piss off the world. I want to stir a turd. No, they're artists. They're just playing rock and roll.
Okay,
Once it hits that nerve of,
So here's a good question.
When they're Public Enemy #1, that's when you're geared up, ready for shock rockdom.
Let's talk like Alice Cooper. Originally, the name of the band was called Alice Cooper.
Right.
And then eventually, Alice became...
He took the name.
He took the name.
Because he went solo. Everybody was going solo, and I don't know what the whole thing was, but he took the name to keep the name. He changed his name to Alice Cooper.
Yeah. Now, one thing I've always noticed about Alice is that he's always been straight up and kind of laid it out that, like, I am playing a character.
Right.
On stage. Like, it's like when I go up on stage, I am playing Alice.
Yeah.
Is that the true? Would that be true for most of the other shock rockers, or is it the lines? There is
something about, when you put on a mask, and I can speak from experience.
Yeah.
When you put on a mask and you do a show, you're not the same person. You're not. There's if you're really in that zone,
yep,
somebody else comes out.
Yep.
And that I'm really into that Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde mentality with artists, who they go up on stage and there's somebody else. And I think that is very true with Alice Cooper, especially, and I think that became more apparent for him when he sobered up. Because, most of musicians or artists, he went through a real rough patch.
Yeah, it's called Flesh to Fashion.
Flesh to Fashion. He doesn't even remember,
and Zipper Catches Skin.
He doesn't even remember recording those. That's how blacked out he was. But, after he came out of the other side of that, and sobered up, he realized, I can still be Alice. It's just he stays on stage, and then when I walk off stage, I go to my life.